Welcome to Writing Black Joy Season 2. I am Sophia Robinson, and I'm a writing coach and an editor and a story listener, as well as the producer of Writing Black Joy, a virtual space that celebrates, centers, and promotes the voices of Black writers and storytellers with joyful and uplifting stories. Here, you'll find conversations with some of my favorite Black writers and storytellers, learn more about their projects and the joy they're bringing into the world, hear more about their creative process, and find inspiration for your own creative ventures, as well as tips and strategies for writing poetry, blogs, creative nonfiction, fiction, plays, and so much more from all types of writers, as well as a sneak peek into the writing life. You could even find your next favorite writer, book, poem, play, or blog. And if you are a Black writer who is looking for a coach or an editor to help you bring your joyful story into the world, then click on my website below to find out how to work with me. In the meantime, let's go to today's guest. Today's guest is Philip Robinson, a Bajan currently residing in the United Kingdom. He's written plays, poems, and songs since childhood, and he believes that diversity needs to be celebrated as a norm rather than a tension that divides. He is the author of 2 children's books, which we will be discussing in our conversation today. Philip and I talk about beauty standards, particularly in children's books and fairy tales, and the lack of association of Black girls with beauty in children's stories. We also talk about how inspiration for stories can come from so many different places, finding the time to write, illustrations of Black characters for children's books, self-publishing versus traditional publishing of children's books, how comparison affects creativity, and so much more. You will find links to Philip's work in the show notes. I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Writing Black Joy Season 2, and today I am joined by someone who may even be related to me.
Very true.
Very true. This is Philip Robinson, and he is many things. I'm going to tell you a few of them in a minute. But first, if you've wandered onto this page and you wonder what you're doing here, what's going on, this is Season 2 of Writing Black Joy, where I am interviewing authors, storytellers, playwrights, documentarians, all types of people. And we are talking all about writing, about creativity, and about joy. So Philip was born in Barbados, the Bajan connection, and he currently resides in the United Kingdom. He's been creating characters and stories since his early childhood. He's written plays, poems, and songs for church youth groups. Philip's new breath of storytelling is inspired from life in multicultural Europe, having lived in Germany, Northern Ireland, and England since leaving Barbados. He believes that diversity needs to be celebrated as a norm rather than a tension that divides. Children, teachers, and parents seem to enjoy his stories and storytelling because of a mix of novelty, imagery, and fun. When he's not writing, he works as an IT systems architect, composes music, indulges in jazz music, tries to perfect his banana bread recipe. We can talk about that, by the way. Give me some tips if you want. I have a really good banana bread recipe. Hangs out with his wife and 2 kids. And to all the Bajans in the house, I'm going to consent to mention that Philip is a Kafir Boy. And I've consented to mention this because his dad is a Kafir alum, and so I think he would be proud of me, acknowledging this, because we all know how people from Kafir are. You know how it is.
Indeed.
So I will acknowledge we went to Kafir. If you're outside Barbados and you don't know what that means, just put a message in the chat.
Get to know it.
I'll explain it later. But it's not a bad thing, but I said I would mention it. So thank you so much for joining me, Philip. One thing I wanted to mention, which he didn't mention in his bio, is that he is also the writer of Nia and the Kingdoms of Celebration and a few other projects that we're gonna get into discussing. I got this book for my nephew as soon as I heard about it, and he absolutely loved it.
Oh.
I wouldn't have told you that, but he absolutely loved it. So if you have kids and you want to grab his book, I'm going to drop all his links and everything somewhere below. If you're on YouTube, you'll find it on the website. If you're on the podcast app, you'll find it in the show notes. So somewhere you'll find links to all his work, and we go from there. Thank you so much for joining me, Philip. I really appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me along.
Yeah. I was so happy. I had considered in season 1, but season 1 went so quickly that everybody that I wanted in season 1, so you were like the first person I contacted for season 2. I'm like, I have to have Philip come in and talk.
Good. But before we go, let's explore the family. Your line of Robinsons.
Listen, here's the thing. I wish my sister was here because she has a lot more information than me.
Okay.
But I do recall my sister and your sister were at school together, and this is how I got the information that we may be related from Nyla and your sister, and they even have the same birthday, so they're very
really. Wow.
Yeah, they do. So I remember when I first met Joanna, and I was saying to Nyla, Robinson, and I was like, I'm sure we're related to them, but I'm not sure how.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was Erdiston, of course, we went to primary school together. So
we did, yeah.
Anything is possible. I'm gonna get more information on that, and I'll let you know. But my sister was almost certain that you're related, so I was like, this is good.
I'm pretty sure we are if we dig into it. I was doing some reading recently, and the first Robinsons appeared in Barbados in 1635. So 10 years after Powell landed is when the name Robinson first appeared. Of course, we know historically there's a lot of trauma and so on included in how that name has been bestowed on us.
It's very true, yeah.
But I think it's fascinating to be aware of this history.
Yeah, I definitely think it is too, and that is something that when I lived in the UK, I got a lot of looks like, how did you get the last name Robinson? I was like, I'll give you a history book. Come back and we can have another conversation.
Read.
Here, read this. We'll talk later. So,
yes.
For sure. So I was gonna say, tell us a bit about your project, but I know from just before we hit record, you have so many projects on the go. So I'm gonna start by asking about Nia and the Kingdom Celebration. I think you have a copy close by, so just hold it up. And I want to say, I love this book. I absolutely love the illustrations. So that's something I want to ask you about later. But tell us, how did you even come to write this book? How did you get inspired to write?
Thanks for asking. But before I go anywhere, let me shout out Charisse Harris, who's the illustrator for the book. Charisse is fantastic. Wonderful human being altogether, but I'll tell you a bit about how we met and how she became the illustrator for this book. But let me go right back to my first inspiration for writing this. This happened when my daughter was about 4 years old, so maybe 2012.
Okay.
And she was starting to get really into like Disney stories, Cinderella, Snow White, those sort of stories. And I just remember this one night I was reading Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs to her. And that line, and I got to that line, Snow White was the most beautiful girl in the world with her snow white skin and red rosy cheeks.
Red rosy cheeks, red lips, black hair.
Yeah. And immediately, for the first time, I've read that story since I was a lad, but somehow as I read it to my daughter, a lump went into my throat. And I had this moment of, wait a minute, you mean we've been reading and reinforcing this story of beauty and this image of beauty to our children and reinforcing to them, this is what beauty looks like from the time they're babies, and then expect them to grow up with a different viewpoint and worldview. And I just said, you know what, tonight we're not reading this book. And that was the end. Never was read again. And I decided to. I made up a story. It wasn't this story, but I can't remember the story I made up for that night. But then once she was in bed, I went on the internet and I just started searching for kids' books that featured. So I didn't have a son as yet back then, but that featured Black girls and associated them with beauty.
Mhm.
And my heart sank because I didn't find any.
Oh man.
I came across books and I started asking some of my circle and friends and so on. And they sent me a few recommendations of books with Black characters. But what I found is a lot of our children's books with Black characters were talking about the experience of being Black.
Yes.
Also not mentioning beauty, but mentioning words like strong and proud and so on. And when they talked about beauty, it was beauty from within. And quite often the children that were depicted in the books were going through struggle, which
Yes.
is a reality. It's a reality of all people, right?
But that's the thing. It's everybody's reality. It's not specific to the Black experience. Like everybody's life is ups, downs, struggles, good, bad.
Absolutely.
And it's, to me, it's kind of a stereotype. Like this is, but also for you to mention that point that the book was about the experience of Blackness. And there was, I remember a while ago I was listening to, and I'm going to put the information on the website, but I don't remember the name of the person who was being interviewed on the podcast. And she said the same thing. She was like, to just have books about Black characters living life, right? They're just living life. They're just going through the usual life, going to school. As I always talk about eating dunks, like, that wouldn't be that's your Bajan, but like when I was a child, that was what I wanted. Like that's what I was doing in my life. I was like, no,
absolutely,
dunks. My belly hurting me, my friends laughing bad. Where was that story, right?
So,
yeah, just living life. So I totally agree with that.
Yeah, and it just stood up for me that there was something missing there, and I sought after doing that. I did come across a few books who had created and some people mentioned this to me, like the Black version of Snow White, the Black version of Goldilocks. And I said, that's cute, but that's not what I want to do. That's not the story I want to read. We have so much stories that we can write. And then I decided I wanted to create my own character. And I'd never written a book before, but I felt as though it was a thing. I'd done like writing music and songs and so on, but I felt as though this was a thing I wanted to do. So I started thinking about the character first. And I'll read to you the first thing I wrote without having the story. I defined the character, and it said this. I chose the name Nia because it's Swahili for purpose.
I was something funny to tell you about that, but go ahead.
Okay. And that's the very first thing I wrote. Princess Nia was very beautiful, so I wanted to have that line in there. Her skin was dark like the bark of the cassia tree and glowed as though the sun's rays lived in her cheeks. So I wrote that and put it down. And then later on that day, I was watching National Geographic, and it was talking about the period of time on the Earth when the Earth was one continent, and just looking at the continental drift and so on. And suddenly, I just had this idea. Ooh, what would have humanity been like if we had remained one continent without a separation by water? And we know, of growing up in the Caribbean, once you're separated by water, it creates very, very different people.
Oh yeah.
Well, and almost this idea of national ownership and boundaries. Water tends to do that to you. And my experience of living in Europe, although you have very different people and borders and so on, because Europeans are very good at drawing straight lines.
Oh my goodness, very straight lines. Like
good. They're good at it, right? But especially with the European Union and so on, the experience of just driving and moving between Germany and Austria and Switzerland and France Belgium very easily flow in, and the languages would change and the accent would change and so on. But there was this almost gradual, like a place like Strasbourg, for example, which is right on the boundary of Germany and France. You know, you can go there and you can speak German and you're fine. I speak German, but I don't speak French.
Wow, that's
You
impressive.
know,
I speak more French than
but
well, I speak no German, but I speak
no German,
a little bit of French. Yeah.
French, yeah. But there you see that that sort of blending of the two languages, French and German, in that region, especially, you know, because there's no water dividing it, so there's this free flow.
Yeah.
And that was kind of my mind. What if humanity was all on one massive continent and they just drifted out to different areas, but still came together? But then this thing happens that breaks their world apart. And I found it a really good metaphor for a geographical split, but also a social and sort of cultural drift as well. And that's what started the story.
Yeah, I love that. And people, like, if you have children, get the book. If you are not a child or have a child, we're going to be talking about what might be coming for you later. But I actually love that idea for a story, and the point that, like, you get inspired from anywhere, right? Like, you were reading a book that you decided, this is not going to work, and then you kind of got the inspiration from there, and then, you know, as you started with the idea. And I find that happens if I am writing something and I start, and then ideas start coming to me from, like, something I'm listening to, or I'm walking down the street, or, you know, you're listening to a conversation or whatever.
Yeah.
Then you just find ideas will be coming to you and stuff like that. What I was gonna say is kind of unrelated, but my my middle name is actually Anania, and when I was growing up, I my alter ego was Nia. So
wow.
So when I saw the book, I was like, oh,
okay. Yeah. That's exactly. I was writing it for you, Safia and Nia.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Let's talk a little bit more about that particular book. Let's just keep going with that, because I'm curious, how long did it take you to actually write it? Just the sort of content for it.
Writing the content took it was sort of starting and stopping, starting and stopping constantly. And I think I had toyed with not writing a book and just going back to my safe space of writing music. So I did consider, instead of writing Nia the book, why not write Nia the song? Yeah, and just leave it at that. But I just kept pressing on, and I remember I committed to the first version of it in 2015, Christmas 2015. No, this was an interesting story. So in 2015, we still lived in Northern Ireland. So up to 2015, we lived in Northern Ireland, and where both of my kids are born. But in 2015, I changed my job and had to move to Manchester, and I moved on my own initially. So I had 6 months of traveling between Manchester, London, and Belfast in Northern Ireland, of doing that for the latter part of 2015. But it meant that I was staying on my own for many nights, you know. And I said, you know what, let me use my time and just write this book and learn to draw. I wish I had the very original one. And what I decided to do was I drew the initial characters myself. I'm no good at drawing. Let me put it that way.
I don't believe you, but go ahead.
So I drew all these initial characters and ideas and wrote the story right to the end and came up with a storyline. And it was quite a lengthy book. I think it was about 50 pages initially.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so that's the very first version of it. But I did it as my daughter's Christmas gift, and got it bonged and printed and everything. So she got that for Christmas 2015, and we were together with some friends, and they saw it as a gift, and they was like, "Oh, that's nice." And so they read it and said, "We really like this story. You should properly get this published." And I said, "Well, if I, because I care about the story so much, if I publish it, it needs to be well illustrated." And then I started reading up on the industry a bit and recognized, okay, 50 pages is too long and too expensive for color as well. So then I just worked hard on reducing the story. I also shared it with another friend I'm going to shout out, call Judith, who lives she's from Belfast. She's Northern Irish, and a school teacher. And I shared it with her. She's an English teacher over in Northern Ireland.
Nice.
And she's like, "Oh, I absolutely love this story. I'm going to share it with my class." I said, "Oh, that'd be great. And I'll give it to them as a writing assignment." And I still have a whole bunch of letters from the children in her class giving me a book review of what they like. So boys and girls, all white, from Northern Ireland, talking about the story. And that for me was one of the really important aspects of the book.
Yeah.
I was not writing a Black story for Black people. I wasn't doing Black joy for Black people.
Yeah.
I was doing Black joy because it's great and everybody needs to feel it.
Yeah.
And enjoy it.
Yeah. And I love that from the perspective that, how 2020 was. This is, by the time this releases, it's going to be February 2022.
Yeah.
But, during 2020 in the online space, I had a lot of people asking, they wanted to read, books by Black writers. In the US, they would say people of color writers, Black writers, and people were looking for social justice books. And I was like, read all kinds of books. It's important to read historical books. It's important to read the historical narrative. It's important to read the books that explain the different tensions and whatever. But it's also important to read all books because I feel like that is what brings the feeling of commonality, right? And the feeling of this person's just like anybody else, as opposed to this is a relationship that has to be curated and managed and whatever. It's like I can just build a relationship with this person because they're just like any other person. So to me, I like that idea that the book is just for everyone because it's just a book about people, children living in a kingdom, doing stuff. And
exactly. Yeah.
It would appeal to any child. So I absolutely love that. Love those letters that you got and that type of thing. How did you go about getting it illustrated? Because that's one of the things. There was on season 1, one of my early guests, Akiwa Ire, she wrote a book about, she writes about African heroes for children. Yeah. And so she said one of the first book she wrote was about the Benin Kingdom. And trying to get that book illustrated, she said she found a lot of people who it was basically like they drew a white character and colored it in brown, basically you didn't get the features, you didn't get the the thing I loved about your illustrations is the girls with the cornrow in their hair and so that's just, I just think of my own, childhood hairstyles and I absolutely loved it. So tell me a bit about the process of getting it.
Yeah, so exactly what you said there was a real challenge I had. And I started off, I met a few creatives and illustrators here in the UK. And when I chatted with them, I just nodded politely quite often, because a lot of what they were saying was they were presenting me the challenges that they would have drawing a Black character, which for me was a bit depressing.
Depressing, yeah, and it makes me think about, and this is kind of almost unrelated, but I was saying to my sister the other day, I went to dental school, pretty boring. A lot of people that see me online don't actually know what I do for a living, which is absolutely
right.
Fine. But I went to dental school, and I remember never, even medical illustrations and everything is always you know, I always tell people the whole medical industry is based around a white man. Like not even,
Yeah.
not even just a white person, but like a white man.
Yeah.
And not seeing like the different, you know, we would be looking at like different stuff that can go wrong with your skin and boring stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you're only seeing it from one perspective. You're only seeing it in one ethnicity. You're only seeing that one thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's probably how people are taught to draw and illustrate and
Yeah.
that type of thing. So I can see, yes, it would be difficult, but I feel like it's surprising to me that you got such resistance, I would almost say, to the idea.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't exactly call it resistance. I would call it this almost intrigue, curiosity, but people were up for doing it, but they saw it as a big challenge.
Okay.
And you know what I mean, and presented the challenge that I would get with it. So I said, just not really. I don't want somebody to do this from a perspective of exploration and challenge. I want somebody to do it from a perspective of real understanding. And then one of my cousins down in London, she reads this magazine. I think it's called Repeating Islands. I think that's the name of the magazine. But they were featuring this artist who was a resident at a place called Fresh Milk.
Fresh Milk. You know, I have a cousin who did her residency in Fresh Milk. She lives in Canada.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Oh,
and I know a few artists that did that were at Fresh Milk. Yeah.
With Annalie Davis. Yeah. So who I've met quite recently as well. But Charisse was the artist in residence at that point in time. And when I read her story and looked at her illustrations and how she depicted her Black characters, and she does things like Black fairies and all sorts of mythical creatures and so on, but starting from that perspective of Black. And I was like, there's my illustrator. Mm-hmm. And so I just looked on my social media network to see if I could find somebody who knew her. And I connected with a friend of mine, Janelle Headley, who does Operation Triple Threat.
Yeah, I know Janelle because Operation Triple Threat had an adult for a very brief moment in time. Yeah. I was with their adult core. Yeah, I know Janelle from school as well. So
Janelle is very cool. I met her a couple years ago through a friend from Northern Ireland, actually. Wow. And I just sent Janelle a message and said, "Hey, do you know this young lady, Charisse Harrison? Could you connect me with her?" She said, "Yeah, I know Charisse." And within 2 days, we had a quick phone call. I told her the story. I sent her the story, and so on. I asked her for her rates, what it was going to cost to do the illustration. Made it very clear this is not me asking for a favor. This is me.
Yeah, like
hiring you. Put in my savings on the line for you because I like what you do. And the interesting thing with her is that for her, drawing the Black characters was the thing she did. The challenges came when I said, "Oh, by the way, all the characters in my book are not Black characters. I have created characters that are Chinese, European, and also Indo, and people who I imagine would look like the various indigenous cultures that would have been found in the Americas and the Caribbean and so on." And I wrote a brief for each character, including Nia's dad. And I reminded her the dad is not me, by the way. Although I started to grow a beard and everyone said, "Oh, look at you, you're trying to become your character."
Yes, when life imitates art.
And I also own a purple dashiki, yes.
Oh my goodness. You sure this is not you? Listen, secretly, right? All authors write about themselves. You know that, right?
Yeah, I think that was it. There's some aspects of his behavior that I did sort of model around how I would respond to situations as well. Yeah, but I wrote the brief about the king, the queen. I even wrote a brief to her about different people in the kingdom who don't really feature in the story. but who will just appear as characters. And what the elders were my favorite. I like describing them, how they would look. And the kingdom itself would be a place of beauty, of simplicity, of beauty, laws of flowers and color. And the other thing I pointed out to her, because we had one point of tension when she sent her first character sketches of some of the people in the kingdom, and I responded to her and I said, "These are not my people, Cherie. Sorry, these people look too, for want of a better word, they look too poor." Right? And I didn't mean that in a condescending way. It just meant it looked like the way Black people were depicted in many books.
Yes.
And I said, I need
royalty.
These people to look like royalty, including the citizens of the society, because they weren't in a time. I started to speak about it as it was a real kingdom. I said it was a thriving kingdom. They were doing well. They had everything. They were the center of this earth that was about to crumble, right? They had everything they could ever want. And then she sent the fresh version. I said, "These are my people."
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and it was a great exchange. And then we just had that exchange of layout and picking up key elements of the story that she would illustrate, and agreed when it was enough. And by seeing the illustrations as well, that helped me to edit the story and get the story down to enough. Because I said, well, the images are speaking for themselves, so I no longer need to write all this text. And that was great. And then once I got to the end, someone asked if I was going to look for a publisher. And then another friend of mine, who's also a writer and a self-published writer and poet, called Raquel over in Northern Ireland. She's originally from Jamaica. She said, "Philip, you got to watch out. You got to watch out with the publishers." But her experience was that you would create a character who was dark-skinned, and by the time the publishers look at it and start to think of their market who needs to buy it, the hue of their skin would suddenly lighten up because it needs to appeal to mass market. So I made a decision. I believe in the story. I'm pretty sure if I really push at some point in time, I'd find a publisher. But I want to own what these characters look like.
And the other thing which I learned just through my own experience, personal and also with other people going through the publishing, both self-publishing and traditional, is that you don't have any ownership of what is published if you go traditional, right? You could send them all the sketches and all the images in the world, but they tend to have, especially with children's books, they tend to have the ultimate say. Most of them, they have their own illustrators that they would use. And so you might end up with a story that's completely different to the story as well as the illustrations that is completely different from what you envision. So I think self-publishing, it's it has a cost and it has a risk, but I feel like I love that it's an avenue that's available for people, because a lot of the time publishers, they want to sell what has always sold, right? So as you said, if they see it, they're like, well, this is what needs to be available. This is what has to look like in order to appeal to a mass market. When the reality of it is, as you said, when your friend who was the English teacher, Judith, who shared it with her students, like, it has appeal regardless, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
It needs to be, what does it say, cafe au lait? It doesn't need to be a person or whatever to have that mass market appeal. So I absolutely love that.
And I stuck with that and decided, okay, this is going to cost me, right? It's going to be quite costly to undertake, but I think it's worth it because I don't see any other stories out there like it. And I just pushed through and took the financial hit, did a lot of reading on what it meant, because when you're self-publishing, you have to recognize, okay, self-publishing isn't without a publisher. It means I am the publisher. I have to set up my publishing company. I have to get my ISBNs. I have to do what a publisher does. I have to figure out what's my best route to market. And I did go with Amazon, although I did get advice from one of the bookstores who stocks the book that I should have not gone via Amazon. I should have just taken the hit and gotten a printer. Yeah. But I was fine with that because this was not a money making quit your job sort of idea.
No.
Right? That wasn't what was behind it. Behind it was really there's stories that need to be told. I need to plant a seed in the market that we need fresh stories and a different way of telling Black joy stories and
yes,
than just talking about struggle.
I agree.
Yeah, and that was it. And I just remember November 2017 when I had all the images from Shuri, I'd compiled them and brought them together. I fitted them together. I'd gotten two different rungs of samples and proofs from the printer from Amazon. And then just remember the moment saying, you know what? That's it. Oh yes, and there's one more person who was involved in this process, and that's my sister Joanna.
Yes, because our mutual person.
Yeah. So I needed an editor, and I'd asked Judith to do a run, my English teacher friend, but she's very kind. I said, who do I know who I can trust, who would be quite brutal and feel no way about it with me? I said,
it's always going to be your sister. Yeah, always.
so that was it. And I just remember, and she was actually coming to visit me around the same time. So things just lined up, and she was coming to visit me in Manchester. I said, hey, good. You're on holiday? Great. Yes. Would you mind? And I know Joanna just sits and reads. So she sat for a day on the table and just took a red pen and went through.
Yeah.
What she did, what didn't sound good, what could go better. And she thought it was going to be one of these moments of sibling squabbling.
Tension.
I was like, nope. That's whatever you tell me, whatever you tell me is better. I'm accepting it and committing it in. And that's what I did.
Good stuff.
And yeah, and just posted it out.
Good stuff. And the thing about that, Joanna's and I are in a book club together, so we're used to tearing apart books.
Yeah.
Obviously. Yeah. But yeah, I think you do, I guess with your sister, and maybe they may not be kind about it. You can kind of take it. You're used to that. You're used to that abuse when it comes to something anyway.
Absolutely.
But also, you do need someone's outside perspective. I think we are so close to our work often that it is difficult to edit your own. I actually think it's impossible to edit your own work.
It is. Yeah. It does take a great measure of humility and vulnerability to hand it over to someone and take it.
That's what it takes. But I do think, A, you're close to it, and it depends on what you're writing, but B, when I went through the editing process with my book, I realized that there were a lot of things that I took for granted because I already knew the backstory. I already knew them in my head. Yeah. And so the editor was like, I don't, like, when you said this, what do you mean? Like, some of it was just simply like, you didn't explain it enough. You didn't unpack it enough. Yeah. Or you said too much, like this is not necessary, or whatever the case may be. And so I think you do need that outside perspective to kind of keep you in check. But it does take a lot of courage. So I'm glad that you that courage and called in the expert.
Yeah.
So that's really good. I know you were showing me before we jumped on, before we hit record, you've got another little project that you created and you did the illustrations yourself. We can talk a little bit about that, but I do have a couple of other things I want to talk about, but you can show us because I thought it was really cool. And it does lead me to my next question. What would you do differently next time?
What would I do differently next time? I think even with this book and one of my other friends, in Northern Ireland. She's American. Willetta. Most of my friends seem to be women, by the way, but that's a different story.
I'm not
But
judging.
but I think in this particular space, a lot of people I've encountered have been women who want to talk about this, and plus a lot of the book is about beauty. But one of the things she had told me was, sometimes my personality doesn't come out in my writing, and for me, I like to bring together. I like to put humor in a lot of my writing, and the way I, even in a very formal setting, unless it's a very serious situation, I would try to use humor, not just to lighten, but to sort of inspire a different way of looking at things. I think I would have tried to weave a bit more humor into the story, because it is quite a serious story, and some of the themes that are highlighted there tend to be, there's a more profoundness to them than the levity with which I like to do. So this particular book is just that. This one is called Daddy, You Cannot Play Santa Claus, right? And it was an idea I had 2019, Christmas 2019 was when people were talking about, could there be a black Santa Claus? And
I was actually thinking about that just this morning. You would not believe it. I really
and it was my son who had sort of, and this one I dedicated to him, because he had sort of asked me about Santa Claus, and so I went through this process of telling him, well, Santa Claus is just an idea, but the original Saint Nick was, from a Turkish priest, so he was actually a white man with a beard. He was more of a brown-skinned person, that sort of stuff. So I wrote this poem called Daddy, You Cannot Play Santa Claus, which is about this very ambitious dad, and I'll show you some of the imagery. Yeah, so this was just a fun story that I wrote after my son was asking me about Santa Claus, and could Santa Claus be a black man, and so on. So it's about this enthusiastic dad. Again, it's not me. He just happens to have happens to have a beard
like you, and glasses, and stripy scarf.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, this guy's mission is to convince his kids that he could be Santa Claus. So he starts off by showing them him dressed in a red hat, right?
Okay.
He says, look, I have a red hat, so surely I could be Santa Claus.
Santa Claus.
And the children are like, Daddy, you cannot play Santa Claus. And then he has this lovely red coat that he shows them and says, look, I have this lovely red coat. They're like, no, you cannot play Santa Claus. And then it gets to the stage where he even buys a whole set of reindeer and bring them in, and he says,
Okay, that is not you. I know your wife would not be up for that.
No,
that is not you.
Definitely not, right? But he goes all out on posing as Santa Claus for the school, and then I won't give the big reveal. But then by the very end, the children tell him why he can't be Santa Claus.
Okay, fair enough.
And it's
funny.
A twist.
Well, I hope that means then that we're gonna get a chance to be able to purchase it, because now I need to know what happened at the end. So
it is available on Amazon again, and it's out there.
I love it.
And the funny thing with this, one of my favorite moments with this particular book is I just mentioned it to the people at work. I wrote this little kid's book, and then one of the guys he sent me a message and said, my wife has been reading that book to her two boys every night, and they ask for it at Christmas. It's their favorite Christmas story.
I love it. I cannot wait to get it. I'm so gonna order it. It's happening. It's absolutely happening. what advice would you give to somebody who's a budding, let's just say creator? Because I mean, you're so many things. You're writer, songwriter. We're going to talk a little bit about upcoming projects in a minute, but
Yeah.
you're so many things. You're banana bread baker. What advice would you give
Oh,
a budding creative?
I would say eat of the fruit of life, not of the fruit of comparison. Right?
I love
No,
that.
no. The reason for this is comparison really leads to death. It is what kills all your projects, all your ideas die the moment you start comparing, and not just comparing because you're saying, oh, this person's so much better than me, but even if you say, oh, I'm so much better than that person, death. It leads
Mm-hmm.
it leads to death, because when you say somebody's work is so much better than yours, the quality of your work just starts to die. Comparison only leads to life if it's an act of humility and inspiration. If you're inspired by someone's work and the beauty of what they do, and you're doing your thing with that as inspiration,
Mm-hmm.
that's life-giving. But the moment you start chewing on comparison, it just leads to shame and letdown, and you
Mm-hmm.
stop working with excellence. So really avoid that. And even in my music and my writing, I've had to teach myself that and meditate on it and remind myself of that, because quite often I'd be playing keys and then I'd hear somebody play and I'm like, oh gosh, I might as well stop playing,
Yeah.
and then
And
and
then
then you
sometimes you do.
realize, wait a minute, but this is what I'm good at, what I do. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's find your thing.
Yes, but I actually really think that's a great way to look at it as well. Let's talk about upcoming projects. 'Cause I know you said you're thinking of writing some more adult as in
Yeah,
for adults, not necessarily adult themed, but
yeah, I know, no,
for
no.
adult novels. So
Yeah, so
let's talk about that.
yeah, so there are two I have working on. One I've made quite good progress with. I don't want to talk about that one
Okay,
because
fine.
I think that one I've told a few people around. I'll tell you offline about it.
Yeah,
But
that's
I've
no
told
problem.
people about it, and the idea of it, I think, is I really enjoy the idea of it. It's a sort of story that I think needs to come to Barbados. It's set in Barbados.
Yes,
So
I love this.
so,
We'll talk
so
about this later.
it's a little bit of a mystery. I'll tell you about that one.
We'll talk about it
The
later.
other
Yeah.
one is the follow-up of Nia and the Kingdoms of Celebration,
Yes.
and it's called The Truth of the Rainbow Roses, right? So in the kids book version, this one, the rainbow roses, they sort of rise up after Nia's song and protect the kingdom, and the world is good. The Truth of the Rainbow Roses paints a different story of intrigue and darkness and mystery, of stuff that's happening behind the scenes between these kingdoms, that's almost bringing them to the brink of war.
Okay, and
Right.
this is sounding so good.
And there's a reason why the world is so dispersed, although there's no borders, right? And it has to do with some people, the kingdom of the Fragranti, the kingdom of fragrant flowers, they love the rainbow roses and they care for them. There are other kingdoms who believe that their mystical power needs to be removed because it can be so dangerous. So when in the children's story, the king is very hesitant about his daughter sending the seeds to her friends, it just seems very innocent, but it's not. There's a real serious adult concern there about if the other kingdoms know that the rainbow roses still exist.
That might be a problem.
Yeah.
This sounds sounding good. I'm
So
looking forward
so
to
that's
it.
so that's the truth of the rainbow roses, is that story.
I
And there's
love
some
that.
other things that happen in there. I've been thinking of the queen as well, of her personality, and trying to bring that personality out a bit more. in this story, because when I saw her illustration by Sharissa, I was like, whoa, she's a woman. She's there's something about her.
Nice.
You know? So I want to bring her personality out a bit more in this story as well. But yeah.
Perfect. I love that. How are you finding the process of writing a novel for adults different to writing a children's story?
I'm enjoying it. Both of them have the challenges. I find with the adult story, it's kind of there's not illustration, so it's kind of this challenge, but freedom to write in more flowery language, to paint the illustration in words, paint the
pictures,
to paint the picture, to fill in and plan and do a lot more planning of your characters and your scenes and so on. Whereas with the children's book, there's more story flow and thinking of the illustrations and how the illustrations tell the story almost. So there's that difference. And also with the children's book, the challengers, and again, this is not, I think we have to be careful of not being condescending with children and dumbing things down so that they can understand.
True.
But it's still being simple enough that children enjoy it and can follow it. And if there are words that they don't know, that they can easily just go off and look them up and come back and still enjoy the story.
Yeah, so or enjoy it based on the context,
Based on the context, they get it.
Yeah.
So yeah, and hopefully they learn while reading as well, and they have interesting questions that they would answer. Whereas with an adult book, there's still that process of learning, but it's going to be a learning from a more experience perspective, right? And it's different language, different use of imagery, and almost sort of weave in a bit of your own philosophical thinking into it.
Of course, I love that. And so we'll definitely be looking out for more of that. I'm gonna put the links to the books that you already have on Amazon in the comments. Do you have any social media where people follow you, or is that more just your personal stuff? Like, how can people?
So follow me on Instagram. I'm not the best at social media these days, to be honest. But there's stuff out there on Kingdoms of Celebration. If you look Kingdoms of Celebration, you'll find me on Instagram, on Facebook. And then if you're interested in following a middle-aged man with random rants on Twitter,
I will follow that one, if you please. So we'll talk about that later.
Random poetic rants.
Sounds good to me.
Follow me on Phil the Music on Twitter.
That sounds good. I'm gonna put all that in the comments. So what type of things do you read? Do you even have time to read? I mean, it sounds like you're busy.
So reading the interesting. Yeah, for me, I was never a great reader. Like growing up with Joanna was always reading, and I was sort of creating things, doing things. That was always us. But I do remember the first big thick book that I read that pulled me back into being a reader when I recognized, oh, this is what I'm interested in reading. And it was a book called The Kafir Boy. I don't know if you've read that.
No, but
I can't remember the name of the author, but it's quite a big book. But my uncle had given it to me and said, you should read this. And it's the life of a young boy. I read it when I was about 13, so I remember reading it. Young boy growing up in Soweto in South Africa and just talking about his challenge, what he had to survive. And that's when I started recognizing the sort of literature I am interested in. So I do like reading autobiographies or historical books, that sort of stuff. And just every now and then novels. Book back here I'm reading is called Complications by Atul Gawande, which is
I love Atul Gawande. Is that a novel or is that
it's not, well, his books are almost
Yes,
like
because I
novels, but it's him telling his story of working in
Mhm.
medicine
Yes,
and so on.
listen,
Yeah,
we could have a whole episode just talking about Atul Gawande. He's one of my
yeah,
favorite writers. People, he's a
yeah,
surgeon.
yeah.
He's just he did a nerdy moment, but I listen to the Reef lectures every
Yeah.
year. There and
Oh, right. Wow.
that was the very first time I listened to the Reef lectures was
I didn't
his.
realize he did a reflector. Okay, need to
He did.
check that
You
out.
have to find it. It is
Yeah,
he talks a lot about a lot of things. He talks about medical medical system and
yeah,
about aging, about hubris. It's just brilliant.
yeah.
It's just brilliant. I can't even words can't even describe it.
Okay,
I'll probably link it in the
I need.
comments, but
Yeah,
he did a
I need to
brilliant
find that. Yeah,
lecture a few years ago. You gotta find it. So I really like him. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Recently, the other book, Walter Rodney.
Mm.
Yeah, it's one of those moments where you're made aware of a book and you say, "What? Why didn't I read this as a youth?" So I'm currently reading his book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. Um, it's such
Mm.
a it's such a significant piece of literature for
Yeah.
us to be reading.
To
When
read.
I
I'm
say
gonna
us, I
have a
mean
look for that.
all
Yes.
people need to
To be
read it.
reading it at this
You
time. I'm
know?
gonna definitely have a look for that.
Yeah.
And you brought up an interesting point. I always think about like right now I'm looking for Christmas gift for my nephew. He's 7,
Hmm.
and you know, I grew up as an avid reader. So did my sisters. We're
Yeah.
still avid readers to this day. But I realized when my godson was younger that he he will read if he's interested. And so I think sometimes some of the books that we get, and this is just one of my little pet peeves, I feel like some of the
Hmm.
books that we have to read at school are not interesting at all. And so
No.
it doesn't, children almost come up thinking that they don't like to read when they probably just don't like to read what they're given
Stuff
at
they've been
school.
given.
And if you're not, we grew up in the library every Saturday and,
Hmm. Hmm.
in a house full of different types of books.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that is something, I always remember a while ago there was this book series called Captain Underpants. I don't know if you know anything about Captain Underpants. This is very random.
I've seen it. Yeah.
But I remember my godson was really into those books.
Okay.
And just realizing like, I gave him maybe like 4 books one year for Christmas and he finished reading them by Boxing Day. But give him a book that he's not interested in, it will just sit there.
We just sit there. Yeah.
And so that's another reason why I'm so happy for so many of the different books that are becoming available, even through self-publishing, because I feel like we need, children will read if they're interested.
Yeah.
Really,
Yeah.
they'll read
Yeah.
if they're interested. And if they're not interested, in see Jane eat a ball or throw a ball or whatever it is, like they're not gonna read, and that's
Yeah.
that. So I love that there's so many, different
Yeah. Yeah. It's how do you expose children to different things? It's like eating,
Yeah, of course. It's like different types of foods and
Yeah.
stuff like that. Yeah. How do you expose them to that?
How do you expose that? Like the other night, I was eating halloumi, like deep fried halloumi. And my son was like, "What's that?" I said, "You should try it." I said, "I don't like it." I said, "You never tried it. Try it." And he tried it. He was like, "This is actually really good." I said, "You see, just try things." But the other thing that I recognized too, because when I left Barbados, I wasn't into mushrooms, eating mushrooms and olives, that sort of stuff. I never had a taste for them. But I remember there was one weekend I traveled with some of my colleagues from work to the south of France. And we were sort of where were we? Quite close to Nice, Mougins. We were.
Okay.
And we were in this nice little village restaurant with wine and olives, and there was just something good about that moment of sitting down. It was warm outside. It was slow. The food was great. The wine was great. It didn't cost a lot, and it was just good. And I think there's something about having a social moment associated with food. And I suspect also with what you eat as well. with what you read as well. Sorry.
Yes, is what you read, and I
What you
like
read in the
that.
social. Yeah.
You know, when you think about like you were talking earlier about your friend Judith, when you think about that favorite English teacher that you had, and you know them, or your parents reading you this book, I feel like it creates more than just the book. It creates that experience, and then you have that memory. You know, I think there are books that I can think about. I won't name them now, but there are books I can remember staying up all night reading. And there was just something about it, you know, that's what made them memorable. You know, waiting in line to get the book, and then you stayed up all night reading it. Like, there's something about that being in that time and place that made it memorable as well. So I definitely would agree with that.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you joining me. I have so many other questions, but we're gonna wrap up here, and maybe you're gonna have to come again on season 3.
I'll be very happy to.
I really have.
And we'll explore our family links a bit more.
Yes, we will. By then I'll have more information, and we can talk a bit also about your songwriting and stuff like that, because I just have so many more questions, but we're going to wrap it up here now. But if you are interested in any of Philip's books, like I said, I'm going to put all the links on the website, as well as on the show notes for the podcast. If you're listening to this on the podcast and you want to see the actual books that Philip wrote, come find us on YouTube.
Yeah.
Right. All the links are going to be all over the place. And come find us, subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the mailing list so you know when there are new guests. Season 2 is here, and we have many more guests to come. So thanks so much for joining me, Philip. I'm going to have you again for sure, and really appreciate that you were able to.
Thanks, Safia.
Appreciate it. Thanks, and everyone, happy reading. Thank you for joining us today. You can find out more about our guests in the notes below, and don't forget to hit subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss new episodes when they drop. And if this has inspired you to get your own writing project into the world, click on my website below and learn how you can work with me as a writing coach or an editor. Until next time, I send you big love from a small island.